morning's gospel reading is a continuation of Mark. We jumped over 12. Not exactly sure why. It's a continuation of the last week we had the different soils. And, this week we're going to continue with another parable, and the disciples will still need some explanation. Matthew 13.
Hey, Pastor, can you turn your mic on?
Oh, well, wait for the sound thing. Jesus tells the parable of the weeds, starting at 13:24. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and started to form heads, the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you were pulling up the weeds, you may uproot the weeds with them. Let both grow until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters to first collect the weeds and tie them into bundles to be burned. Then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." Going to 36. Then he left the crowds and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us this parable of the weeds in the fields." He answered, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are the angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so will be the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteousness will shine like the sun, the kingdom of their Father. Whoever has ears, let them hear." The word of God for the people of God. Sometimes the lectionary readings don't always match, but I'll have to commend the lectionary preparers for putting the story of Jacob alongside the parable of the weeds and wheat. I consider it a wonderful juxtaposition, because most of us would have trouble being fully supportive of Jacob's actions. If you get into the whole story, he was a bit of a rogue. And we would be likely to uproot him, just like the servants would. But for some reason, God chose him long before he was ready. As a matter of fact, when he had his dream and God made his promise, Jacob was on the run from his brother who wanted to kill him, and I won't say rightfully so, but he thought he had good reason. But Jesus gives us pause. Jesus tells us to wait and reminds us that we are not equipped to see the depth of anyone's heart. Here's a story that I found. A man's wife attended one of the area churches regularly, but he did not attend and had never accepted Christ. On one of the pastor's visits, the husband told the pastor that he lived a good life, and as any of the church members that he knew, and saw no reason to make any changes. You know, he was right about living a good life. Many people who do become Christians will need to change very little from what they do in their daily routines. But it's not what they do, it's the focus of their lives and their visions now have an eternal destiny built into them. Jesus deals with the issues in his own special way in this parable of the wheats and the weeds. The passage is often, and like some people like to do it, as referring to the church, but Jesus is pretty clear. The field refers to the world. Understanding the realities of the kingdom life should provide us help to focus on what is the most crucial, being citizens in God's kingdom. What are the realities of kingdom life? Well, one of the realities is we grow up alongside with these weeds. And what does a parent tell a child something when they're trying to do something, and then a kid brother or a friend or sister is pestering them and irritating them and being a weed in their life? Just ignore them and get on with what you're doing. Isn't that hard to do as a kid? But it's one of the first lessons we learn. And all we're doing is taking some of those basic lessons and just ramping them up a bit for adult life. Jesus is telling them, you're just going to have to ignore that. Now, much to our chagrin, Jesus rarely talks about the evil that's in this world. He talks about the enemy sowing these seeds. He doesn't say why. Somehow we feel that we should know why. It would help us understand better. But how can we understand the mind of God? Really? We want to, but we can't always do that. The basic thing is Christians and non-Christians must coexist in this world. No, he doesn't say too much about why there's evil, but Jesus makes it clear in this passage that people of the church and people of the world are going to progress through life together. Knowing this is really instructive for both groups. First of all, it's a warning to the church, because more often than not, when you just can't seem to get your focus off the irritants, the evils, the weeds in our life, we have a tendency to go to one extreme or the other, and that would be to turn in on ourselves. Church have to avoid the compromise of the worldly philosophies that are really unacceptable to God. And then the other extreme is avoid isolation from the world. I mean, there's monks, and there was the Essenes, the caves of Qumran, where they lived. They hid because they just didn't like the way the Jewish authorities were compromising with the Romans. So they took all their little scrolls and they went and hid. We benefit from them because I think it was the 50s, we found a lot of the Dead Sea Scrolls. But it didn't do them much good. Those are extremes. And we find ourselves waffling, I think, between the two. The idea is to be, you've probably heard it before, to be in the world and not of the world, just as Jesus modeled it in his own life. And we all know that's pretty darn hard. And I think, second, it's a wake-up call for the people of the world. They need to understand that togetherness doesn't always mean sameness. You've got to agree with me or you're not right. It's clear from the text, although coexistence is a reality, people of the world and the kingdom are in fact different. And people of the world and of the kingdom look all for the same. We can't really tell the difference. To sit there and choose. There was a children's time I was looking at, it was a little, I think it was more for upper grade school or high school, and they were showing all these pictures of people. Some was kind of clean cut, and one looked like biker things. But the bottom line was, they were opposite. This one was a criminal and a very dastardly person. And this person, who seemed to dress rather gruffly, was actually a minister on the road spreading the gospel. And there were several things like that to say, well, if you can't judge it, then you have no right doing it. Yeah, we do look different. And in preparation for some of this, I'm far from a Greek scholar, but I have some sources that we do for preparation. And the Greek term was zizana, and that's the term they use for weed, which translates to a name that we might recognize, darnel. Darnel is a weed that most resembles wheat in Israel, especially at the time. And it would have been very plentiful. I remember seeing places where we didn't mow and there was grass would grow up. And yes, grass has its own seed. Weeds obviously have to have seeds or else they wouldn't spread. But what I like about it, they mentioned that the darnel, for the most part, looks like wheat all the way up till near harvest time. The heads with their seeds stay upright, and the heads of wheat, fully abundant growth with fruit, they use the term fruit for wheat, they bow over. And it's as plain as can be which one is wheat and which one is the weed. I really like that little clarification, and I got thinking about it. A Christian uses their gifts, whatever your earthly gifts are. And there are many. We've talked about that. But when your heart is full, you share. And God is faithful that as we share, our gifts can grow. As a matter of fact, we can carry so much that our heads or the stalks are bowed over with weight of our fruit. Whereas the weeds, their seeds are just as high as they can to spread them. They only have enough to preserve their own system, and they're not in a sharing mode. I don't even know if weed seeds are edible, but they certainly would take too much work to get them. So which one does the Father want us to grow and cultivate? It's the ones that can be shared, that can nourish us and nourish our neighbors. And part of the looking the same too, there's a quote from Saint Bonaventure. He's a 12th century Italian mystic and theologian and philosopher. He said, something may appear to be good, but in reality it destroys something of a greater good and opens up the doors for more obvious evil. And that's why it's so hard for us sometimes to choose. Eternally, the Christian and the non-Christian will often look alike. Externally, excuse me. They may work in the same office, the same factory. They may be on the same street, involved in the community activities. This is because both groups are affected by the norms of their culture. But we need to be a positive effect on our culture. And I think the fighting that we see around the world, the divisiveness keeps the focus off of what we're doing. We don't make our potential when there's a lot of fighting over, oh, I'm doing it this way and you're doing it that way, and that's not right. And then the whole time I'm worried about what's going on around me, and I'm not raising my potential. It's tough to think about. And there are a lot of people that say there's no such thing as evil. It's just different. This is where you started at. And in modern psychoanalysis, people would say there's no evil. That's dichotomy. It's no. But you know, it's probably the one, original sin is probably the one thing that's in the Bible that I think everybody can prove to their own satisfaction. We're thousands and thousands of years later, and there's still something wrong in Denmark, as they say. We still have to resist temptations. We still have to resist distractions. And we still have to know, acknowledge that God knows a heck of a lot more than we do. Internally, we are different. We see that in this, in spite of their similarities and appearances, kingdom people have an eternal outlook. And that kind of counteracts the me first and now movement. And I think part of this passage is just to teach us that, like I said, the kids, you can't always tell the difference. If you're spending a lot of time trying to figure out what the difference is, a lot of time trying to bring things to the same, then I think you'll find out that you aren't doing what the kingdom value is, because God has already said, I will come and straighten things out. And that's hard for people that, I hate to say the word, evil in the world, the people that are self-centered. And usually a Christian would say, hey, what you're doing is not right. It's not right because it's harmful to yourself, it's harmful to your family, and eventually will go bad. And then some will listen and some won't. That's what Jesus would say. Spread the gospel and shake the dust off your feet if they don't listen. Whereas I'm noticing that a lot of times when somebody is doing something not legal, you'll hear the words, everybody's doing it. Whether it be take extra things on your taxes or this, everybody's doing it. And they're just not happy being the lowest. So they want to bring you down to the lowest common denominator. That's the only indicator that I can think of that you can tell to be careful and wary in your deeds. You should be allowed to be who you are and pursue that. And if they're bringing you down, then to their level, then there's something wrong. But even then, you got to be careful, because even then, what do you do with all this fruit? Wheat and seeds in this parable are simple, and the problem with any parables is you can take more out of it than you're supposed to. He's just saying that we can't always choose. We can't always recognize evil in this world. We focus on ourselves to a certain extent. But when we have that overflowing abundance of fruit, that can be shared. I always say anyways, the biggest miracles in life are not turning water into wine or dividing an ocean. Because there are scientists that say, oh, winds came by and it was thin. And I've seen all these scientific explanations for how things happen. But there's no scientific explanation for a hardened heart that becomes soft again. That's probably one of the biggest miracles. And until harvest time, it's God's time. You do what you need to do, you be an example, and if necessary, even be helpful. That's probably one of the most urgent admonitions I see from this. Not to just look like Christians, but surrender yourself like Jesus. Jesus was telling his disciples, yeah, you need to walk away at times. But as we pattern ourselves after Jesus, when he knows what he's doing out of love, he surrendered himself and he gave his life. And what did Jesus say? No greater love does a person have for another than to have put down his life for them. Parents do that for their kids. Soldiers do that for their countries. That's one of the greatest gifts you can give. And you can't ever judge when there's a time for that. We're supposed to spend a little time trying to say, am I a weed? Am I a wheat? I can answer that. That's one of the few answers I can give you. You're God's children. You're not weeds. Let us live that way. Amen. Our last hymn is number 368 in your large